And now we'll render it. Motion blur is going to be very key to the look of this thing. So that's something we should just turn on right away. Go back to the Metro node, rendering, allow motion blur, change this to physically based rendering, which is largely the same as the ray tracing. There's just some small differences in the way it does lighting calculations. We'll need our ground plane, of course. Like that. So the ground plane is pretty much trash right now. So let's skip to a frame where we have something more interesting to show. I'm going to say, let's take our ground plane. I'm going to rotate it so that it kind of fills this out a little bit better. We'll want to like stretch it out a little bit. Maybe even just move it back. We can do something like this where we move it back and then we'll curve it up in the back. Just so we don't see to infinity. We'll make it a NURBS type to help it look nice and curvy or easily. I'll grab these points, soft transform them. There we go. I'll just bring that up, something like that. I could even like, that's actually fine. Bring up the radius slightly. There. So now we've got that going on. We can tell our environment light actually now that we only needed to do the top hemisphere. We don't need to waste our time with stuff underneath. And let's just make sure that our pieces don't like go through the back there. I don't think they do. Doesn't seem like they do. So let's get a quick look at what this looks like. I just saved it there. Now it's going to take longer to render as it's got a lot more to do. We need to turn the motion blur on this thing. Render, or rather material. No, it's render, sampling, geometry, velocity blur. We have velocity blur because there are computed V's on everything. Our simulation, at least with our actual rigid stuff here, our actual pieces, these all have this V attribute. V and W. W again for spinning. Whereas on this side, we calculated per point velocities on this, also stored as a V. And then even though we assembled it, inside of it, it still has it. It'll find it during render time. So let's just make sure that this is the output. And let's run a frame of this, but I'm going to run a frame of this at a half resolution. As in previous lessons, we can make takes, and the takes can have different render settings as you try to iterate on this. And this is a perfect reason why we check before we do anything. That's I don't have my ground plane included here. Output, ground. So once again, let's see what it looks like just to make sure everything's on the up and up. And I was starting to say you can make a takes system where you have overrides. You can have a low quality render setting. You could have a high quality render setting, and just iterate on where the light placement is, how bright it is, or whatever else you're doing to low quality. And then when you're finally ready to kick it off for the evening, switch back to the high res. But everything seems on the up and up here. And it's all, it's all good. I'm going to cancel it again. And the only other thing I want to make sure is that the motion blur is working. So we'll just find like a more chaotic area here. So something like where it's first smashing into the ground, for example. There we go. And this should be all really a blurry mess, which is too bad because, we spent so much time with all this bending stuff, but such is the life of visual effects artists, is doing stuff that gets lost in motion blur. All right, looks like it's working. I see the individual pieces working, and I see the body. I don't see anything that's like too in focus, as if no motion blur was being applied to it. Cool. So I'm pretty confident that this is working. And I would say we should be ready to go. We don't need to render this first frame, but I'm gonna just keep it in anyway. Otherwise, we could have it start in frame 2 or something. We'll go back to the full resolution. Some quick and dirty settings that you might want to do would be like reflect limit, because the light will reflect, or our camera rays rather will reflect off of the glass and much of the metal. We don't need it to like bounce 10 times. That's ridiculous. 3 and 3 is usually what I do to start with. Like we want to see through the glass and then through another piece of glass. So maybe even keep it to 4. I don't think we need any like crazy global illumination stuff for diffuse limit, but why not? You never know. We might see a little bit. It might be nice, and we're just gonna run this overnight essentially anyway. So we might as well put it on. Anything else we might want? We didn't do any like sub simulation frames. That might be useful, honestly. With these spinning rotor blades, they might look a little weird. They won't have like an arced rotation unless we simulated on those subframes and saved that out. We didn't do that. That can be future work. Maybe in an advanced lesson I'll show you how to do that. But at any rate, and everything else is pretty much fine. We can always, up any of these, but these are already relatively high. The pixel samples will make a big difference, but they'll also make the render take exponentially longer, and I don't think I want to do that. But you could bump this up to 6, or even 9 if you had a render farm at your disposal or just a lot of time. I'm going to keep them at 3 for now. I think this is fine. It's going to look cool, especially with that little bit of diffuse limit stuff that we put on over here. And yeah, so let's render that, and I'll see you tomorrow. So here we are, the render all done. Kabloosh. All good. And I know I said that I wasn't going to make any more tweaks, but I actually did do a couple more. I ended up using this blue cloth material for the chairs instead. I felt they were standing out too much in my render otherwise. So yeah, that was just a blue cloth here thing, and I swapped out the plastic for that. Also, I actually did end up doing 6/6 for the sampling. There we go, 6/6, and actually probably one of the more important ones, which I think is interesting and it might apply to you as well, is the shutter time on the camera I brought down. The default, I believe, is a half. That means it's going to motion blur half of the frame. This instead is an eighth of the frame. Considering how fast this thing is moving and how bright it is anyway, it made sense to bring the motion blur down quite a bit. So we still have motion blur, as you can see, coming in, but I really wanted to show the impact, and it's just too much of a muddied mess otherwise. So anyway, here it is, the final render. It does include the first frame there, which I guess we really don't need. So I'll just, there we go. Now it starts at frame 2. And here it is. So I hope this lesson was helpful. There's so many things about learning constraints that it's kind of difficult because it's like I said earlier, it's not that well documented, especially things like making the rest length 0 or really how to effectively build up those little granular pieces into systems that, break the constraints when this happens, or apply, this kind of material to these pieces and build that up into like some super system. There's a lot of grains. There's literally powerful bullet grains here, but it takes like a good system to really make it useful. This ends up like something like this. Denting, not built in, deformed, rigid surfaces not really built in, all that stuff. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the lesson. It's a lot of insider info in there. I'd love to see what you come up with it. And yeah, just hold on to this setup as like a template too, and then just make changes to it. You don't have to rebuild it every time you do a project. Obviously, you just change what you need to. So I'm rambling again. Yeah, there's an optional chapter coming up next that's just about how to export to Maya, if that's something you might be interested in. Otherwise, I'll see you next time for Applied Houdini.